Hey guys, tonight we journey to a time when the American dream didn't come with Wi-Fi or a thermostat. No, tonight you step into scratchy wool, grab a splintery hoe, and trudge into the wind-beaten hills of early New England. The sun's not up yet, but you are, your breath puffing white in the chill dawn, your boots heavy with frost, and your thoughts already circling around one question: how on earth do you grow food in this mess? Because let's be honest, the land doesn't exactly roll out the red carpet for you. The soil's thin and rocky, stingy with nutrients, and littered with boulders the size of baby elephants. Trees cling to every slope. The nearest patch of flat ground is probably already claimed by someone with more livestock, more tools, and probably a better hat. You don't even have a proper barn yet, just a rude little cabin where the wind winds through the cracks like a hungry ghost. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You square your shoulders, pick up that iron-shod hoe, and walk into history. This is New England in the early 1600s. You're either a freshly arrived colonist, brimming with naive optimism, or the child of one, already hardened by the lean years. Either way, you're staring down a problem that no amount of sermons or star charts can solve. The land is tough, uncooperative, and wildly different from anything you or your ancestors have worked before. Forget those golden fields of England or the rolling meadows of Europe. What you have here is a landscape shaped by glaciers, scraped raw, rock-strewn, and absolutely determined to break your will. The glaciers, long gone now, were not exactly subtle decorators. They shoved stones around like a toddler with building blocks, then melted off and left the mess for you to clean up. So you start small. You scout the land. A flat patch near a creek, maybe. Even that is full of tree roots and rocks. You hack and dig and curse and maybe cry a little. You don't just plow the field, you excavate it, like an archaeologist digging through layers of prehistoric chaos. And those rocks? Oh, there are so many. You toss them aside, day after day, stacking them into little piles that eventually become walls. We'll come back to those walls, oh yes, but for now, it's just you and the stones, locked in what feels like a personal vendetta. Every time you dig, a new one pops up, like the world's most inconvenient surprise party. And the trees. Good grief, the trees. Towering white pines and oaks with roots like iron cables. Cutting one down is just the start. Then comes the stump. And if you want a real test of character, try digging out a stump with 1600s tools. It's a trial of strength, patience, and lower back resilience. You might try burning them out, setting fire to the base and letting it smolder for days. Just try not to set the whole forest on fire. That happened. More than once. Historians still argue whether colonists preferred full clearing or slash and burn, partial clearing. Some say total deforestation was the goal, while others point to patterns suggesting strategic retention, shade, shelter, or even spiritual beliefs. But you? You just want enough room to grow something, anything, that won't immediately die. And you're not farming for fun, remember. This isn't a quaint little homestead Instagram reel. This is survival. Starvation is a real, breathing threat. Last winter, you watched neighbors bury loved ones. This spring, your own pantry echoes hollow. There's no time for learning curves. You need food, and you need it fast. So you make do. You turn over the gritty, reluctant soil. You pick a sunny patch, because even you know plants like light. You eyeball the seed spacing. Too close and they'll strangle each other. Too far and you waste precious land. You drop those seeds, corn, if you've been lucky enough to trade with a native neighbor. Or maybe barley or turnips, which your ancestors swore by. And then you wait. You water when you can, weed as best you know how, and hope to high heaven something green appears. One quirky tidbit. Some colonists believe that talking to their plants helped them grow stronger. So yes, you might find yourself whispering sweet nothings to a squash sprout. Don't knock it, it's no weirder than some of the folk cures people tried for scurvy. The early American farmer, was a gritty, desperate innovator. You couldn't afford to farm like your ancestors. This wasn't the old world. There were no neat fields stretching to a tidy manor. This was a place where the land said no, and you had to say yes louder. And so each rock you remove is a tiny act of defiance. Each stump burned out is a win. Each green sprout that dares to rise through that stingy soil is a miracle you earned with sweat, spit, and possibly a few swear words mumbled under your breath. And as twilight falls over your first half-cleared field, you lean on your hoe, aching in places you didn't know existed. The wind cuts across the hills. Owls begin to call from the tree line. And somewhere behind you, a child's laughter echoes, fragile, bright, and full of the kind of hope that makes your exhaustion worth it. Because you're not just scratching out food. You're building a life. A future. A reason to stay. And that rocky field? It's slowly, stubbornly, becoming yours. You wake before the sun, again. Your joints ache like you're 3 times your age, and your hands? You've stopped noticing the blisters. They've just become part of you, like the creak in your back or the soot under your fingernails. The morning air bites sharp, and your breath ghosts in front of you. But no one's going to chop this forest for you, and definitely no one's going to plant your crops. So you grab your axe, hoist it over your shoulder, and walk into the trees. You've got one job today: make this forest go away. Every tree you see is another square foot of food you can't grow. The dense forests of early America were beautiful, sure, towering, ancient, full of mystery, but they were also in the way. If you want sunlight to hit the ground, you've got to swing. You aim for a straight trunk, one you can drop cleanly. Whack. Whack. The axe bites deep, and the smell of fresh pine or oak seeps out. You're sweating within minutes. You pause only to spit in the dirt and maybe, if you're lucky, to tie a bit of cloth around your brow. After a good half hour, the tree groans, leans, and crashes down with a thunder that scares up birds and shakes your ribs. One down. Dozens more to go. The early American farmer, again, that's you, was part woodsman by default. Clearing land wasn't optional. It was a rite of passage. And most of the time, it wasn't just you. Your spouse, your kids, your neighbors, all of you took turns chopping, dragging, and stacking. It was exhausting, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Historians still debate just how many acres a typical family could clear in a season. Some argue for 6 to 10, while others say it was closer to 2 or 3, especially when you account for the tools available and the sheer bodily toll. But whatever the number, one thing is clear: you earned every inch with muscle and grit. And speaking of tools, well, let's just say you weren't spoiled for choice. Your axe, your maul, your handsaw, none of them have ergonomic handles or carbon steel precision. These are iron and wood, handmade or imported, and they wear out as fast as your patience. Your hands get nicked. Your shoulders burn. The blade dulls. And yet, you keep swinging. Once a patch of forest is down, you've got another problem: stumps. And roots. You can't just leave them. Try planting corn on top of a maple stump and see how well that goes. Some farmers tried yanking them out with oxen. Others lit fires at the base, letting the roots smolder for days. Sometimes, you built your crops around the stubborn ones, vowing to deal with them next year. Or maybe never. Because let's be real, some of those stumps were practically sacred by the time you gave up. And then there's the brush, the messy, tangled aftermath of branches and undergrowth. You rake it into piles and set it ablaze. Thick smoke curls into the sky. Your eyes sting. Your clothes smell like a campfire for days. But the ash left behind? That's black gold. You don't know the chemistry, but you do know the result. Ash sweetens the soil. It adds minerals, improves texture, and helps coax life from the earth. So burning isn't just about cleaning, it's part of the farming itself. Ash means hope. That's why you start noticing the pattern: chop, pile, burn, clear. Chop, pile, burn, clear. Every swing of your axe is part of the rhythm that builds your farm. It's not fast, it's not pretty, but it's how you muscle a future from the forest. One quirky little wrinkle in this tale. Some folks used pigs, yes, pigs, as land clearers. Let them loose in a patch of woods, and they'd root up the underbrush like tiny, snorting bulldozers. It wasn't a perfect method, but if you had pigs and patience, it helped. And the emotional toll? Let's not pretend you're always stoic about this. There are days when you lean on your axe handle, covered in grime and sweat, and wonder why you ever thought this was a good idea. You imagine the green fields of England, or the warm sun of the Caribbean colonies, and you grit your teeth. But then you hear it, the crackle of fire on brush, the gentle crunch of your family moving stones behind you, the lowing of your cow in the distance. This isn't just land clearing. This is land claiming. Every tree you fell, every stump you dig, every ash-smudged cheek in your family, it's all part of the transformation. Of course, not everyone agreed on the best way to do it. Some settlers believed in keeping a few trees for windbreaks or shade. Others cleared recklessly, only to regret it when erosion washed their precious topsoil away. Historians still argue whether early deforestation was more about long-term planning or short-term panic. But you? You just need a place to plant this year's corn. And maybe some beans. If you're lucky. You look back at the cleared patch. It's ugly, blackened stumps, scattered limbs, bare dirt pocked with boot prints. But it's also yours. And tomorrow, when your arms stop screaming, you'll start turning that dirt. You'll build up a bed, rake out the roots, and hope the sun hits just right. Because in this world, progress smells like smoke, tastes like sweat, and sounds like an axe cracking into oak. And as you walk back to your rough cabin, the light dying over the trees still standing, you realize something strange: the birdsong sounds different out here now. Like the land is starting to notice you, too. You wake to rain this time. Not a gentle patter either, this is the kind of steady, soaking rain that seeps into your boots and sticks in your bones. You pull your coat tighter, step outside, and squish into the muddy yard. Behind the cabin, your new clearing is starting to resemble something farm-like. A few hopeful sprouts poke through the dirt. But what really grabs your attention, again, is the rocks. It's like they multiply overnight. You swear you hauled every last one to the edge of the field yesterday. But here they are again, scattered like confetti, laughing at your optimism. And you start to realize something every early American farmer learns: the rocks never really leave. They just wait. Thank the glaciers for that. Thousands of years ago, titanic rivers of ice crawled over this land, grinding, scraping, bulldozing everything in their path. When they finally retreated, they left behind a geological junk drawer: boulders, cobbles, pebbles, gravel, all jumbled together like nature's worst landscaping plan. The result? A nightmare for farming, and a full-time job for you. You pick up another fist-sized rock and toss it toward the wall you've started stacking. It lands with a satisfying thud. You wish it made a dent. But that wall? It's growing. Slowly, stubbornly, like everything else here. Here's a wild little historical fact: New England has more miles of stone walls than roads. Some say there are over 200,000 miles of them, winding through woods, across meadows, vanishing into thickets where farms once thrived. Many were built just like yours, by hand, stone by stone, as part of the endless battle to coax crops from glacial leftovers. And why walls? Why not just pitch the stones into a big heap and be done with it? Because walls do more than just clear the field. They mark territory. They keep livestock in, or out. They make you feel like you've claimed something permanent in a place where nothing else wants to cooperate. Also, let's be real, when you're hauling rocks every day, you might as well stack them somewhere useful. Or, at the very least, somewhere poetic. You drag another rock. Then another. Your fingers go numb. Your shoulders ache. But the rhythm of it, lift, carry, drop, starts to take on its own sleepy rhythm. You imagine future generations walking past this wall, wondering who built it. What they'll never guess is how much swearing was involved. Of course, not everyone agreed about the rocks. Some clever souls, probably from further south, suggested using wood fences instead. Quicker, lighter, and, arguably, prettier. But in rocky New England, you used what the earth gave you. And the earth gave you rocks. So many rocks. There's even a strange debate among scholars about whether some of these early walls were intentionally aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, that kind of thing. Did the farmers have time to get mystical? Or did the stones just end up where they fit? Historians still argue whether stone wall placement had practical or symbolic meanings, or maybe both. You're too busy tripping over them to care much today. And then there are the stone boats. No, not actual boats, though that would have made things way more fun. These were sled-like platforms, often pulled by oxen, designed to drag rocks out of fields with a little less backbreaking agony. If you were lucky enough to have an ox team, a stone boat was your best friend. If not, well, you had your own 2 legs and a lot of time to kill. But not all stones were a curse. Some were surprisingly useful. A flat rock might become a doorstep. A tall one could serve as a hitching post. You might even set a big, flat slab out back for laundry days. Heck, bury one halfway and call it a bench, your future self will thank you. And then there were the really big rocks, the ones too massive to move. These became landmarks. Turn left at Widow Harlow's boulder, someone might say, or, past the field with the devil's tooth sticking out of it. Some farmers left them alone. Others painted symbols, initials, or crude drawings on them, early graffiti for those with something to say and nowhere else to write it. One fringe belief floated among certain settlers was that large stones, especially the oddly shaped ones, held spiritual power. Some thought they hummed at night or glowed faintly under moonlight. You haven't heard any humming yet, but after enough long days and skipped meals, you wouldn't be surprised if a few of your rocks started talking back. There's something strangely meditative about this whole rocky ordeal. As much as you hate them, the stones become familiar. You know their shapes, their edges. Some have names now: Stubtoe, Backbreaker, the Tripper. You start to understand why poets and painters would later romanticize these walls. They're not just barriers, they're relics of stubbornness, symbols of people refusing to be beaten down. And when you finally pause, wiping sweat from your brow despite the rain, you look at your wall. It isn't straight. It bulges awkwardly in the middle. One stone looks like it might fall off any second. But it's standing. And that counts for something. You turn back toward your cabin, stomping the mud from your boots. Behind you, the field is a little less rocky. The wall is a little taller. The soil is just a bit more ready for planting. Progress, in this world, is made in inches. In aching backs and chipped fingernails. In endless stacks of silent stones. You didn't ask for this landscape. But you're making it yours, one rock at a time. By now, your hands have calluses on their calluses. Your back hums with that familiar, dull ache, and your dreams are mostly just scenes of rocks laughing at you. But as you look over the field you fought so hard to clear, there's something oddly comforting about the low, crumbling stone walls edging your little patch of hard-won earth. They're not pretty, not precise, but they're yours. And they're beginning to do more than just get rocks out of your way. They're starting to keep things in. That's the magic of the early American stone wall. You didn't build it for beauty, and definitely not for speed. You built it out of sheer necessity, out of whatever the earth spat at you. And over time, these walls became as much a part of the landscape as the trees you cut down. Every farmer around you is doing the same thing. Everyone has too many rocks. Everyone needs to fence their fields. And wood? It's too valuable for burning, building, or repairing your leaky roof. So rocks it is. And you begin to realize these walls aren't just a way to organize your chaos, they're quiet sentinels of your survival. You lift another stone. It's heavy and awkward, the kind that pinches your fingers no matter how you grab it. You wedge it between two others on the growing wall, listening for the soft crunch of moss and grit. It holds. For now. And that's the thing, you didn't use mortar. Just gravity, balance, and a decent eye. That's how most dry stone walls work. You stack large foundation stones on the bottom, smaller ones on top, and tuck the gaps with whatever fits. The result isn't glamorous, but it weathers wind and time surprisingly well. Some of these walls, yours included, might still be standing 300 years from now, long after your name's been forgotten. One historical fact that always surprises folks: by the 1800s, there were more stone walls in New England than in all of Britain. It was like the land itself had been turned into a massive rock puzzle. Entire counties were carved into crooked grids of stone lines, each one whispering tales of sore backs, hungry winters, and stubborn farmers who just wouldn't quit. And because these walls marked land, they also marked ownership. That was no small thing in a time when property meant power. Your wall might not have a lock or a deed nailed to it, but it shouted to every passerby, "This is mine. I've worked it. I've bled into it. Step carefully." Of course, you didn't build them all at once. At first, you just tossed rocks into a rough row. Then, when you had time, maybe in late fall after harvest, or on a rainy day when planting was impossible, you'd tidy the heap into something taller, straighter. A little more like a real wall, a little less like an accident. Eventually, you develop a technique. You start fitting the stones like puzzle pieces, paying attention to weight, balance, even color. You know which ones chip easily, which ones shift when it rains, and which ones somehow manage to sink deeper into the ground every spring like they're trying to escape. And you learn tricks, too. Like putting flat stones on top to shed rain. Or leaning the wall inward slightly so it doesn't collapse outward. These weren't just personal insights, they were part of a shared, evolving wisdom passed between farmers like secret recipes. One of your neighbors swears by a method he calls shingling, layering small, flat stones on the outside face of the wall to keep larger ones in place. Another talks about lace walls, the kind with open spaces so wind can pass through without knocking them over. You listen, you nod, and you quietly steal whatever works. And sure, sometimes you cut corners. Sometimes the rocks are just too awkward, or your hands are too cold, or you just don't care anymore. But then a cow escapes and you spend an entire afternoon chasing her through the woods and promising yourself you'll never skimp on the wall again. One quirky tidbit? In especially stony places, people sometimes built double walls with a gap in between, then filled the gap with rubble. It was a weirdly efficient way to deal with the endless stones, and it actually made for a stronger barrier. You consider it, but then you remember how long it took just to build the one wall, and you decide maybe your cows can learn to respect a single wall for now. As your walls rise, so does your pride. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing the boundaries of your farm etched in stone. They hold in your livestock, hold back the weeds, and hold together your will to keep going. They're silent, yes, but not passive. They've earned their place here, just like you. Historians still argue whether stone walls were always practical or sometimes symbolic, expressions of control, legacy, or even spiritual protection. After all, some walls lead nowhere. Some loop in strange curves. Some enclose nothing but thickets and silence. Maybe they weren't built just to do something, but to say something. That you were here. That you endured. And then, one day, something funny happens. You stop hating the rocks. They're still annoying. They still trip you, bruise you, pop up out of nowhere like uninvited guests. But they're also familiar. Constant. You start to see their colors, grays, browns, streaks of quartz. You trace the lichen patterns with your fingers. You pause, sometimes, just to sit on the wall and watch the light shift across your field. And in that moment, you realize, this wall is more than a fence. It's a diary. Each stone a sentence. Each scrape a punctuation mark. You didn't write it in ink, but in bruises and breath. And it's not done yet. Tomorrow, there'll be more stones to move. Always more. But for now, you rest your hand on the cool surface of your wall, and you let yourself feel it, the quiet, steady pride of building something that will outlast you. The sun's up before you are, and for once, that's not your fault. Last night's storm churned up the wind something fierce, and this morning the fields smell fresh, damp earth, pine, and the faint tang of smoke from the hearth. You stretch, bones cracking like a dry branch, and shuffle outside to the plot you've worked so hard to clear. It's almost time to plant again. But today, you're not digging. You're burying something. In your hand is a dead fish. No, this isn't a joke. This is the fertilizer plan. If you've traded with the local Wampanoag, or just watched them closely enough, you've picked up this strange, slightly revolting practice, planting a fish with your seeds. The logic? As the fish decays, it feeds the soil. The corn, in turn, grows strong and tall, nourished by the protein-packed rot. Now, this might sound like a food waste nightmare in modern ears, but to you, it's just farming. If your soil won't give freely, you bribe it, with decomposition. So here you are, scooping out holes in the loosened dirt. In goes the fish, usually herring, maybe menhaden, or whatever swarming upriver during the spring run. On top of it, a few corn kernels. You pat it down, muttering something between hope and prayer. And move to the next. You can smell it already, that earthy, salty funk. And come July, when the corn's up to your waist and golden tassels wave in the wind, you'll swear by the power of the rot. Unless, of course, the raccoons get there first. Historians still argue whether the fish planting method was a widespread native practice or more localized, and whether colonists quickly adopted it or remained suspicious of its smell and unfamiliarity. Some records suggest early Puritans turned their noses up at the idea, at least until their crops failed without it. Others, more desperate or observant, copied it from the start. Either way, you're giving it a try. Because frankly, you're out of options. And here's the twist, the soil loves it. That rocky, stingy patch behind your cabin suddenly becomes a little more forgiving. The corn doesn't just sprout, it thrives. Green shoots burst from the ground like they've been waiting centuries for this moment. You marvel. You feel like a wizard. A stinky, exhausted wizard with fish juice on your boots. Still, there are risks. Too much fish, and your plants burn up from the excess nutrients. Too little, and you've just wasted bait. Plus, there's the smell. Oh, the smell. It hangs in the air, especially on warm days, mixing with sweat and livestock and whatever your neighbor's been cooking. One traveler later described colonial farms as an olfactory ordeal, though probably not in those exact words. And then, there's the wildlife. Burying a fish is basically ringing a dinner bell for every animal in the forest. Skunks, raccoons, feral dogs, you name it, they come sniffing. You set up scarecrows, hang pots and pans, shout into the night. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you wake to find little paw prints and overturned soil where your corn used to be. One quirky workaround? Some folks swore by urinating around their crops to deter pests. Yes, really. Apparently, the human scent was enough to scare off certain scavengers. So, late at night, you might find yourself out in the field, defending your fishy investment in the most undignified way possible. But you keep doing it. Because it works. And slowly, word spreads. Other farmers come sniffing around, literally and figuratively, curious about your booming corn. You explain the method. Some recoil. Others nod solemnly. Soon, they're hauling buckets of fish guts and planting like you do. You're not just growing corn. You're growing tradition. What's fascinating, when you step back and squint at the bigger picture, is how this one simple method represents a collision of cultures. Native agricultural wisdom meets European desperation, and the result is survival. It's easy to forget, this early on, how much knowledge was exchanged, quietly, unevenly, sometimes without credit. But you see it here, in the dirt, where something dead becomes something living. And speaking of credit, do you know what one of your kids said the other day? They asked if they could name one of the fish before burying it. You tried to say no. But you gave in. Now there's a corn stalk somewhere on your land that grew from Captain Slippery. You can't decide if that's disturbing or adorable. The method isn't perfect, of course. It's hard work, it smells, and it depends entirely on fish availability. A bad season upriver means less fertilizer. A too warm spring means faster rot, and sometimes, if you're really unlucky, a maggot bloom you'll never unsee. And yet, you keep planting. You tweak the process. Add a handful of wood ash here. Try spacing the kernels differently. You listen to your neighbors. You watch the weather. You talk to the soil like it might talk back. Historians don't always capture these moments. The little experiments, the whispered advice, the superstitions. But they matter. Because behind every tidy textbook sentence about colonial agriculture is someone like you, kneeling in the dirt, burying a fish and hoping to feed your family. So tonight, as the sun dips low and the scent of damp earth clings to your sleeves, you sit on your stone wall and look out at the field. The corn is still young, but promising. The fish are underground, doing their silent work. And for the first time in a while, you feel like maybe, just maybe, the land is starting to say yes. You wake up with dirt still under your fingernails from yesterday, but today your mind is already turning toward the next step. Corn's only one part of the plan. If you're going to survive here, and thrive, you'll need more than just tall stalks and the faint aroma of buried herring. You'll need a team. Not of people, necessarily, but of plants. Enter, the three sisters. Corn, beans, and squash. It sounds like the start of a joke or a folk song, but it's actually a powerhouse trio, a living system passed down by native farmers long before you ever stepped foot in this soil. And when you plant them together, they don't just coexist. They collaborate. First, the corn goes in. You've already got the rhythm for that: dig, drop, pat, move. You give it a little space this time, because now, you're making room for company. Next comes the beans. You tuck them in near the corn stalks, not too close, not too far. Finally, the squash, big, generous mounds at the base, spaced like lazy suns around the whole pattern. And then you wait. You know what happens next. Corn shoots upward, fast and proud. The beans, stubborn and scrappy, twirl their way around the stalks like little green dancers. The squash spreads low, its broad leaves shading the soil, choking out weeds, and keeping precious moisture from disappearing into the sky. It's not farming. It's choreography. And it works. Somehow, it works. You watch the transformation with something close to awe. Three plants, so different in size and habit, all supporting each other. Corn offers the spine. Beans bring the nitrogen, literally fixing it into the soil to feed everyone. And squash? Squash is the bouncer. No weeds, no intruders, just business. Historians marvel at this system, and yes, they still argue whether colonists fully understood the science behind it, or if they simply copied what they saw from native communities. Some scholars suggest many colonists tried to impose Old World row planting on the New World's chaotic elegance and failed miserably. You don't claim to understand the chemistry or the geometry, you just see the results. One quirky tip you picked up from a neighboring homestead? Some people swore the beans had to be talked to in order to climb properly. So now, every few mornings, you lean down and offer a few encouraging words to your leggy green friends. Your kids think you've lost it. But hey, they're growing, aren't they? And if you're lucky, you might even spot a hummingbird weaving through the bean blossoms. It pauses, wings flickering like tiny blurs, sipping nectar before darting off. That tiny burst of color in the green patch feels like nature tipping its hat to you. Of course, it's not all harmony and bounty. Squash bugs are a nightmare. They creep in under the leaves like miniature tanks, feasting on vines and sucking the life out of your hard work. You try all the tricks, ash circles, hand picking, even boiling vinegar, but sometimes, you just have to accept the loss and replant. There are also the surprise debates. Did you know some folks argued whether pumpkins counted as real squash? You didn't. You also didn't expect to care. And yet, here you are, elbows deep in a garden dispute about varietals while swatting mosquitoes and wondering if your ancestors would roll their eyes at you. Still, the system is resilient. That's the genius of it. If one sister struggles, the others help pick up the slack. If the squash leaves wilt, the beans still win. If the corn bends, the squash cushions the fall. It's a lesson in survival through companionship, something your body, your family, your whole village is learning in parallel. And more than that, it saves space. You're not working 3 different plots, you're working one. Efficient, compact, elegant. It means you can devote the rest of your clearing to other needs, maybe a few herbs, maybe some tobacco if you trade for seeds, or maybe just an open patch for kids to run wild while you pretend you're not worried about next winter. You also start to notice the soil changing. Softer. More responsive. Less like a battlefield and more like a conversation. You rake it gently now, not just to weed but to read, looking for clues, feeling for moisture, noticing the subtle signs of health or fatigue. One morning, as you lean over the squash, a neighbor stops by. They peer over your fence, eyes widening. That growing together, they ask, eyebrows raised. You nod. 3 sisters, you say, without looking up. They grunt, a skeptical sound. Heard about that. Seems messy. You shrug. So's life. They leave without comment. A week later, they're planting corn and asking about beans. Because here's the thing no one told you, farming is contagious. You figure something out, and people notice. And suddenly, your little patch of organized chaos is inspiring others. Your neighbors start talking less about what won't grow, and more about what might. That's the beginning of something bigger than just survival. Some nights, as the frogs sing from the creek and the leaves rustle in warm breezes, you sit in the dirt and watch the moonlight on your garden. The corn sways. The beans shift. The squash sprawls like a sleeping dog. It's alive in a way that feels like a story unfolding. You don't know everything. You never will. But this, the balance, the growth, the shared space, it's enough. It's a whisper from the land, and from the people who farmed it long before you, saying, this is how you stay. You've learned to appreciate some strange things in this life. A rock that doesn't move when you step on it. A shovel that holds together for one more dig. And most of all, manure. Yep. Today's joy is brought to you by muck, dung, filth, call it what you like. But when it comes to farming in this stingy soil, you've come to see manure not as something to scrape off your boots, but as a gift. A weird, smelly gift from your animals to your crops. This morning starts like many others. You head out to the barn. Well, it's more of a glorified shed with ambition, and you're greeted by the familiar aroma of livestock perfume. The cow lows at you like she knows what's coming. The pigs snort and root around, blissfully unaware that their droppings are about to be repurposed into agricultural gold. You grab your pitchfork and get to work. See, early American farms weren't just about growing crops, they were symphonies of interdependence. You fed your animals with garden scraps and pasture grass, and in return, they gifted you with warm bodies in the winter, eggs or milk if you were lucky, and piles upon piles of fertilizer. You cart it out by hand, unless you've got a wheelbarrow or, if you're especially blessed, a rickety sled. You dump the manure on your resting fields or mix it directly into the soil before planting. And you don't skimp, you pile it on like frosting on a cake baked by desperation. Because the soil here? It needs help. The original surface layer was scraped thin by glaciers, and what's left is acidic, compacted, and stingier than a merchant in a bad mood. Without manure, your crops don't just grow slowly, they sometimes don't grow at all. Historians still argue whether colonial farmers fully understood the nutrient cycles involved or if they were simply mimicking what they'd seen in Europe. Either way, they came to value manure the way a modern homeowner values Wi-Fi, unpleasant to think about, but essential to function. And it wasn't just cow or pig waste. Oh no. Chickens contributed, too, though their offerings were so potent you had to dilute them unless you wanted to sizzle your seedlings. Some folks even collected human waste, politely referred to as night soil, though let's not dive too deep into that aromatic rabbit hole tonight. One quirky trick passed around among your neighbors? Mixing ashes from the hearth with the manure. Supposedly it balanced the humors of the soil, whatever that meant. You tried it once. The cabbage seemed to like it, so now you do it whether or not the science adds up. Your compost pile starts to grow, a strange, steaming monument to patience. You layer in scraps from the table, peelings, bones, spoiled food, and mix it all with straw and manure. Let it rot. Let it stew. Let it break down into the kind of dark, crumbly substance you used to associate with rich, distant farms in travel tales. Now you're making your own, one wheelbarrow at a time. The smell? It's powerful. Not exactly the kind of scent you'd bottle for perfume. But to you, it smells like food security. Like survival. You notice the difference within a season. The soil, once tight and stubborn, starts to loosen. It clings to your fingers differently. It crumbles instead of clumping. And when you pull a carrot from the ground and see it straight, thick, and unchewed by pests, you can't help but grin. Not that it's foolproof. Too much manure and you can burn your crops. Not enough, and you're back to scraping by. You learn the rhythm by experience, and error. Oh, the errors. Remember that one summer when you went a little overboard on the pig dung? The beans didn't just grow, they ran. Vines up the wall, through the window, one tendril even tried to curl around your cat. It was funny. Later. You've also heard whispers of something new, green manure. Cover crops planted not for food but to be plowed under and feed the soil. Ryegrass, clover, even buckwheat. Radical stuff. Some neighbors scoff at the idea. Why plant something you don't eat? They snort. But you're curious. Maybe next season, after the squash comes up. One day, while spreading a particularly fragrant load of compost, your youngest child asks, "Why are we putting poop on the food?" You pause. A reasonable question. You try to explain microbes, nitrogen, soil structure. Their nose wrinkles in betrayal. You give up and say, "It's how plants eat breakfast." They nod solemnly. Like if we ate soup made of garbage? Sort of. And just like that, your whole operation is rebranded as garbage soup farming. The name sticks longer than you'd like. You keep going. Because every smelly load is another layer of future growth. And because no one else is going to do it for you. Farming isn't about glamour. It's about grit. And sometimes, it's about standing knee-deep in cow dung while rain drizzles down your neck, dreaming of tomatoes. At night, as the air cools and the flies finally buzz off, you look over your fields. They're not perfect. They're patchy in spots. A few rows are crooked, and there's that one corner where nothing ever grows. But they're alive. Thanks to the filth. Thanks to the rot. Thanks to your willingness to turn the gross into the glorious. You fall asleep with the scent of soil still on your hands, and for once, you don't mind. It means tomorrow might grow something new. You take a long, slow breath. The scent of turned earth and manure clings to the air, but your eyes are on something different now, a patch of ground left deliberately untouched. It sits just past your main field, a square of scraggly grass and stubborn weeds. No corn. No beans. No squash. It looks neglected, maybe even a little sad. But you know better. That's your fallow field. You didn't forget to plant it. You didn't run out of seeds. You left it empty, on purpose. It's a strange thing, letting land rest, especially when every bite you eat depends on what the soil can give. But over time, you've noticed something important: soil gets tired. Just like you. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for it is nothing. This isn't a new idea. Farmers in Europe have been rotating and resting fields for centuries. The logic is simple: if you plant the same crops in the same place every year, the soil gets stripped of nutrients. Yields drop. Plants weaken. Diseases creep in. But if you give the land a break, let it breathe, weed over, reclaim a bit of its wildness, it can bounce back. You didn't believe it at first. Letting land go fallow felt wasteful. But after watching your neighbor's crops wither from overuse, you gave it a try. One field left unplanted for a season. Maybe two. And you started to see the difference. The next time you planted there, the soil felt richer. Softer. The plants stood straighter, greener, like they were grateful. It was like the earth had taken a nap and finally woke up ready to work again. Historians still argue whether fallowing was widely practiced in early colonial America or mostly reserved for wealthier landowners who could afford to waste space. Some records suggest smallholders like you couldn't always manage it, every square foot was too precious. Others say even the poorest farmers learned quickly that overuse brought ruin faster than patience ever could. You chose patience. Of course, not everyone agrees. You've had more than one visitor point to your fallow field with a puzzled squint and ask, "You given up on that patch?" You just smile and say, "Nah, it's on vacation." That usually earns you a blank stare. Or a chuckle. But deep down, you know the truth: rest is part of the work. Still, you don't just leave the land to go totally wild. You might sow a few clover seeds, let it grow as a cover crop. Maybe some ryegrass, if you've got spare seed. These plants aren't for harvest. They're for healing. Their roots loosen the soil. Their bodies return organic matter when you cut them down. Some even add nitrogen naturally. It's the farming equivalent of a warm blanket and a good meal. One quirky practice you've picked up involves letting chickens or pigs roam the fallow plot. They scratch, they dig, they drop their own brand of fertilizer. They do what animals do best, make a mess that somehow improves things. And if you're especially daring, you let wildflowers grow. Not many farmers bother with that. Wildflowers don't feed your belly, after all. But they feed the bees. And the bees? Well, they do feed your belly. You've noticed your squash does better when bees are buzzing. You didn't read it in a book. You just saw it happen. Now, you throw a few old seeds into the fallow field each spring, coneflowers, maybe some yarrow, and let the insects do their quiet, essential work. And then there's the emotional part, the bit you don't talk about much. The fallow field gives you rest too. Sometimes, after a long morning of hoeing and weeding, you wander over there. You kneel in the grass, let your hands sift through the untended soil. There's something peaceful about a field with no expectations. No neat rows. No performance. Just being. You don't always get that luxury, not in this life. But the land, at least, reminds you it's possible. That said, you still worry. Every farmer does. What if next year's yield falls short? What if leaving this plot bare means your family goes hungry? You do the math in your head constantly, bushels, barrels, mouths to feed. Letting land lie fallow is a gamble, and the stakes are always high. But so far, it's paid off. The rested fields grow stronger crops. The rested fields resist pests better. The rested fields teach you that not all growth is visible right away. There's an old saying you've heard passed around like a treasured scrap of wisdom: let the land catch its breath. You repeat it sometimes, just under your breath, while watching the breeze ripple across your untended ground. You picture the soil sighing in relief, shedding the memory of plows and footprints and seeds that demanded too much. Historians might debate the origins of fallowing. They might study soil samples and crop rotations and draw careful graphs. But you? You just see the proof in your harvests. And in your knees, which thank you for having one less field to weed. Tonight, you pass the fallow plot on your way in, and for a moment, you stop. The moon casts long shadows across the uneven grass. A cricket chirps. Something rustles in the brush, probably a rabbit, maybe a fox. And you think, tomorrow, I'll plant here again. But not yet. The field isn't ready. And neither are you. Let it rest. Let it renew. Because even in a world where everything depends on work, rest has value too. You can feel it in your bones before you even step outside. The air has changed. It carries a sharpness that wasn't there yesterday, a hint of something unsettled. You crack open the cabin door and squint at the sky. It's not raining. Not yet. But the clouds are low and thick, like a wool blanket someone forgot to shake out. You tug your coat tighter. It's going to be one of those days. Weather rules your life now. You used to think you were a morning person, or a hard worker, or maybe even brave. Now you know better, you're a gambler. Every time you plant a seed, you're betting on the sky not to betray you. And early American farmers? They bet with terrible odds. There's no radio. No satellite imaging. No radar apps with friendly sun icons. All you've got are your eyes, your bones, and maybe, a battered copy of the farmer's almanac tucked beside the hearth, pages creased and smudged with grease. You flip it open sometimes, tracing the cryptic predictions. Rain likely near St. Swithin's Day. Plant peas before the moon wanes. If March comes in like a lion, you try not to put all your faith in it, but when the clouds roll in and your seedlings look nervous, it's hard not to hope that little book knows something you don't. Historians still argue whether early colonists genuinely trusted almanacs or just used them as comforting guides, like carrying a rabbit's foot or avoiding black cats. Some farmers followed them religiously. Others scoffed. But nearly everyone owned one. Because when your survival hangs on frost dates and rainfall, any edge feels better than none. Today, you glance at the sky and think about planting beans. Almanac says yes. Your gut says, maybe. You walk the rows, testing the soil with your boot heel. Still too wet from last week's storm. You wait. That's half of farming, waiting. Not laziness. Not procrastination. Just knowing that hurrying the land never ends well. You've learned that the hard way. Like that time you planted too early, charmed by a warm spell in April. The corn shot up quick, proud and green, and then a surprise frost hit, turning it limp and brittle overnight. You buried those stalks like tiny victims. Lesson learned. Or that awful summer when it didn't rain for 6 weeks. The sky mocked you with endless blue, and your squash leaves curled like old parchment. You hauled water by hand, bucket after bucket, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was. You watched the ground crack, and you cracked a little too. That's the thing with weather, it's not neutral. It feels personal. When a storm flattens your corn, or hail punches holes in your cabbage, you don't just lose food. You lose time. Sweat. Hope. And maybe a little bit of your sanity. One quirky belief you've heard? Some folks swear that hanging a dead snake on a fence keeps storms away. You haven't tried it. Yet. But after last month's windstorm shredded your bean trellis, you might be reconsidering. You try to read the signs instead. A ring around the moon means rain. Birds flying low means a storm's coming. If your rooster crows at odd hours, brace yourself. The trees? They're weather prophets too. You've learned to listen when the leaves flip upward in the breeze, showing their pale undersides like shy warnings. But no matter how closely you watch the skies, the truth is, you never really know. You plant anyway. And that makes you, somehow, both brave and a little bit reckless. Today, after hours of indecision, you go ahead and plant the beans. The clouds haven't cracked yet, and the breeze has calmed. You press each seed into the softened soil like a secret. You cover them gently, pat the earth, and whisper, yes, whisper, a few words of encouragement. You're not superstitious, exactly. But hope has to land somewhere. Your neighbor stops by in the late afternoon, coat flapping in the wind. Heard the almanac says dry week ahead, she says, eyeing your freshly planted rose. You nod. Sky disagrees. She shrugs. Sky always disagrees. And that's the unspoken truth among you and your fellow farmers. The weather never really listens. It just is. And you, poor fool that you are, keep trying to make peace with it. Sometimes you get lucky. A soft rain falls right after you sow, the sun breaks through just when your tomatoes need warmth. And those moments feel like grace. But sometimes, the storm comes anyway. Historians note that early farming journals were filled with weather reports, not in the poetic sense, but in the daily, practical grind of temperatures, cloud cover, precipitation. These people, your people, lived close to the bone, and every cloud mattered. Weather wasn't background. It was plot. And so it is for you. Tonight, you sit on the stoop, watching the horizon fade. The wind has picked up again. Your bones hum with that strange, anxious electricity. The clouds are darker now, layered like bruises. You wrap your coat tighter and hope the beans make it through the night. Tomorrow might bring rain. Or sun. Or something worse. But tonight, you wait. You listen to the sighing trees. You watch the fireflies blink into the dusk. And you remember, you've gambled before. You've won, you've lost, and you've always kept planting. Because in this life, the forecast may never be clear. But the mission? Always is. The sun's barely up, but you can already hear the soft rustle of skirts, the creak of a garden gate, and the swish of water sloshing in a tin pail. It's not you this time. It's her, your wife, your daughter, your sister, your mother. Whoever she is in your household, she's already halfway through her morning chores while you're still stretching your back and rubbing the sleep from your eyes. Because out here, in the fields of early America, women's hands are everywhere, planting, weeding, watering, preserving. They run the gardens, feed the chickens, boil the herbs, and somehow still find time to hem a dress or soothe a fussy toddler while shelling peas. And yet, when the story of farming gets told, their names are often left out. But not tonight. Tonight, we're paying attention. You watch her move through the kitchen garden like she belongs to the soil as much as it belongs to her. The rows are tight, tidy, and brimming with life: onions, garlic, dill, sage, maybe even a row of tansy, that strange bitter herb she swears keeps flies off the cow. The cornfield gets the glory, sure, but it's this garden that keeps you fed day to day. This garden that keeps scurvy from creeping into your bones. This garden that she's coaxed from the same rocky ground you cursed back in section 1. She doesn't need your help. Well, maybe just to lift that rain barrel. But she's been managing this patch since the second spring, using tricks you never thought to try, like steeping nettles for tea to pour over the plants, or burying eggshells near the tomatoes for calcium. You thought it was all folklore. Then the tomatoes turned out better than yours. Now you nod solemnly and pretend it was your idea. One quirky belief she holds tight? That talking to the plants, especially before a thunderstorm, makes them stronger. You teased her once. She didn't answer. She just went right on whispering to the rosemary. Historians still argue whether colonial women were the silent partners of agricultural life or the true backbone, just quietly doing 70% of the work while the men got the property deeds and the long letters to Europe. Either way, you know better now. She isn't just helping the farm, she is the farm. And it's not just planting. It's preserving, too. She's out here gathering herbs to dry, onions to braid, greens to pickle. You've seen her crouched by the hearth, boiling down pints of crabapple jelly, stirring slow with a wooden spoon, humming a song older than either of you. She's already thinking about winter while you're still wiping dirt from your neck. And heaven help you if you mess with her root cellar system. She's got it down to a science. Turnips go here, cabbages there, and the potatoes? Layered in straw like royalty. You tried to help once. You put the squash on the wrong shelf. You're still hearing about it. She passes knowledge to your children, too, quietly, in moments you barely notice. Your daughter knows how to tell mint from lemon balm by scent alone. Your son can crush garlic into salve for a scraped knee. These aren't chores. They're inheritances. And while the fields run on sweat and storms, the garden runs on instinct. She knows when to plant by the smell of the wind. She knows when to pull carrots by the color of their tops. Almanacs are fine, but her hands are better. Of course, she gets tired. You've seen her sit on a rock at dusk, hair pinned up in a messy coil, hands slack in her lap. You sit beside her sometimes, saying nothing. She leans on your shoulder for a minute, and then she's up again, chasing a chicken or scolding the dog or yelling at the kids to stop climbing the apple tree. But every once in a while, she surprises you. Like when she pulled a strange little gourd from the soil last week, shaped like a crooked bottle, striped like a cat. Good for soup, she said. Then added with a sly smile, or curses. You're still not sure if she was joking. Later that summer, when the squash bugs return in full force, she's the one who figures out how to keep them at bay, planting nasturtiums nearby, their peppery flowers acting like bodyguards. You'd never have thought of it. Now you do it every year. And when your harvest comes in, and your cellar fills up, and the first frost dusts the ground like powdered sugar, you know whose hands made it possible. Hers. Rough, nimble, cracked from soap and soil. Historians might not put her name in the big books. But you'll remember. Because when you were ready to give up on this rocky land, she planted a garden. When the crops faltered, she preserved every last beet. And when the storms came, she saved the seeds. You don't need a monument. You've got this patch of earth, this tangled row of herbs, this house that somehow keeps standing. She did that. Quietly. Relentlessly. With one eye on the weather and the other on your well-being. Tonight, as the lantern flickers low and the kids finally stop arguing over who tracked mud inside, you watch her tuck the last basket of herbs onto the shelf. She sighs. You sigh. The cat stretches. And in that soft quiet, you realize, this farm doesn't work without her. It never did. The handle digs into your palm, smooth from use but still unforgiving. You lean your weight into the hoe and feel the jolt up your arm as the blade hits something solid, probably another rock. Again. You grunt, scrape, and swing again, until the clump of soil finally breaks apart. It's another morning in the field, and your tools are ready to betray you at the first sign of fatigue. Let's talk about your equipment. Or, as you sometimes call it, the collection of medieval torture devices dressed up as farming tools. Early American tools weren't fancy. They weren't efficient. And they definitely weren't comfortable. If you're imagining ergonomic handles and sleek metal heads, forget it. Most of your tools are handmade, or at least hand-repaired, with iron blades hammered into shape and wooden shafts that splinter no matter how much you sand them. The plow is your beast. It looks noble enough, like something out of an oil painting, but using it? That's a whole different story. You've got a wooden beam strapped to a crooked iron blade, dragged by an ox that doesn't particularly want to cooperate. You guide it through the field with a mix of yelling, grunting, and prayer. It's supposed to cut neat furrows. Sometimes it does. Most times, it skips, snags, or drags up a root the size of a ship's rope. And when you hit a rock, well, if your fillings don't rattle, your patience surely will. Historians love to point out the difference between the scratch plow used in Europe and the heavier moldboard plow developed for American soil. But neither of those facts helps your aching shoulders today. You just know this thing weighs more than your eldest child and is just as stubborn. And then there's the hoe. It's your go-to. Your sidekick. Your burden. You swing it more than you swing your axe now. You use it for breaking up clumps, carving out rows, chopping weeds, and occasionally, when things get really bad, smashing a thieving raccoon's escape path. It's a simple thing, just a wooden handle and an iron blade, but it becomes an extension of your body. You know its quirks. Where it creaks. Which side of the blade digs better. Which knot in the handle bites into your palm when your grip slips. And when it finally breaks, you mourn it like a friend. Then you patch it together and keep going. Your rake's not much better. Half the teeth are crooked, one's missing entirely, and the handle's been, temporarily, wrapped in leather for 6 months now. You keep meaning to fix it properly, but other things keep breaking. Like your dignity. Or your wheelbarrow. And yes, the wheelbarrow. A noble invention, sabotaged by mud. One good wheel, one bad attitude. You load it with compost, push it 5 feet, and watch it tip over into a rut. You fix it. Again. It tips again. You say things the preacher would disapprove of. There are days when you wonder if your tools are helping or testing you. A neighbor of yours, bless his creative soul, once tried to fashion a seed spreader using an old butter churn and a handful of nails. It didn't work. But he insists it was ahead of its time. One quirky invention that did gain traction. The dibble stick. Just a pointed wooden dowel, used to poke holes for seeds. Simple. Effective. Weirdly satisfying. You've got one carved from an old axe handle, worn smooth by use and stained with years of dirt and ambition. You call it, stabby. There's something oddly intimate about your relationship with your tools. You don't just use them, you know them. You patch them, oil them, lean them against the wall like tired friends at the end of a shift. They've all got names, even if you'd never admit it publicly. Historians still argue whether early American farmers had enough access to blacksmiths and imported tools or were mostly making do with local materials. In your case, it's a mix. You traded salted fish for a new scythe blade last spring, but the handle is a repurposed fence post. Not elegant, but it works. Mostly. And there are times, long, sweaty afternoons, when you catch yourself daydreaming. Not of riches or fine clothes, but of a tool that actually works the first time. Something light. Balanced. Maybe even sharp enough to slice weeds instead of encouraging them. You imagine showing it off to your neighbors. They all gasp in envy. You smile. Then you trip over a rock and wake up. But despite the blisters, the splinters, the occasional tool-induced tantrum, you keep at it. Because these crude implements are the only line between bare ground and full cellar. They're how you turn chaos into order. And they carry stories, each notch, each rust mark, each worn grip etched with days of effort. You remember the first time your child asked to use the hoe. You hesitated, afraid they'd hurt themselves, or worse, break it. But you handed it over. Watched them drag it through the dirt like it weighed 100 pounds. They grinned like they'd just been handed a sword. And just like that, your battered tools became heirlooms. Tonight, you stack them against the barn wall, handles crossed like sleeping soldiers. Your hands throb, your back protests, and your knees crack like kettle corn. But as you stretch and watch the last of the twilight fade over the garden, you allow yourself a moment of pride. These tools may not be pretty. They may not be kind. But with them, you've carved something real from the stingy earth. And tomorrow, you'll pick them up again. Because they're not just tools anymore. They're how you keep going. You kneel by the edge of your field, fingers sifting through the gritty soil. Your breath fogs slightly in the cool morning air, and your eyes scan for signs of life. There, just peeking through the brown crust, tiny green blades, thin and brave. Your grain is coming up. It's not flashy. Not tall like corn. Not sprawling like squash. But this modest patch of grain, is a gamble you're proud of. Because if it works, it means bread. It means porridge. It means food that fills more than just your stomach, it fills your season. You've planted rye this year. It's hardy, it tolerates poor soil, and frankly, it's what you could get your hands on. You'd like to grow wheat, who wouldn't, but wheat's picky. It needs better soil than you've got, more sunshine, fewer stones, and a whole lot of praying. Maybe next year. For now, rye will do. Grains were always the long game in early America. While vegetables and beans keep your garden colorful and your stew pot interesting, grains feed you through the winter. They bulk out your diet. They feed your animals. They give you flour, sweet, precious flour, for bread, cakes, dumplings, and if you're feeling festive, a slab of barely sweetened pudding that somehow still cheers the soul. But coaxing grain from this stingy land is no small feat. First, you have to prep the soil just right. Not too rich, not too lean. Then you broadcast the seed by hand, yes, by hand, tossing it like you're feeding chickens. The trick is even distribution, but of course, the wind's never in your favor. So you go back and rake it in, gently, hoping the birds won't beat you to it. Then comes the waiting. The worrying. The pacing. You watch the sky like it's your moody landlord, wondering if it's going to flood your efforts or dry them into dust. And when those first sprouts appear, you feel a bloom of relief so big it almost makes up for the backache. Historians often note how grain crops in New England never quite matched those of Old England. There's debate about whether it was climate, soil, seed variety, or just inexperience. Some argue that colonists clung too tightly to European methods, failing to adapt. Others say it wasn't stubbornness, just bad luck. You say, it's the land. She doesn't give easily, and she doesn't like foreign guests. Still, you've had a few surprises. Like that patch of barley that refused to grow last year, then suddenly erupted like a golden carpet after a long rain. Or the oats you tried on a whim because someone in town had too much seed. They took to your soil like they'd been waiting there all along. Quirky fact of the day. Some farmers used to sing while scattering seed, seriously. Supposedly, it helped keep the rhythm, and maybe the plants liked the vibration. You tried it once, humming low as you worked. You weren't sure if the rye liked it, but your kids thought you'd lost your mind. And honestly, it made the work go faster. Then, once the grain grows tall and heavy, comes the real fun: harvest. You cut it by hand. Sickle or scythe. Swing, cut, gather. Over and over until your legs cramp and your arms burn. You bind the stalks into sheaves and lean them against each other in little pyramids called stooks. They look like a miniature village of golden tents, quietly drying in the sun. If it rains, you panic. If it doesn't rain, you still panic. Because once grain is up, every squirrel, bird, and sneaky rodent wants in. You post a scarecrow, stuffed with straw and dressed in your least favorite shirt. You even carve a face on it, grinning wide like a lunatic. Doesn't always work, but it makes you feel like you're doing something. And then, after the drying, comes threshing. Oh, threshing. You haul the dried sheaves into the barn, lay them out on the floor, and start beating them with a flail, a wooden stick connected to another stick with leather. It's as fun as it sounds. You beat and beat until the grain separates from the husk. Dust chokes the air. Your arms go numb. Your kids laugh when you sneeze mid-swing. Then you winnow. Which means tossing the threshed grain in the air, letting the wind carry off the chaff while the good grain falls back down. It's beautiful, in a way, the golden kernels dancing in the light breeze. Unless there's too much breeze. Then your dinner flies away and you cry into your sleeves. Some clever neighbors have built little wind tunnels or use baskets to catch the grain as it falls. One particularly inventive fellow nearby claimed he could winnow using a fan made from turkey feathers tied to a stick. You admired the creativity. You also saw him trip over it and land face first in the feed bin. So, mixed results. But by the end of the season, if the stars align, you've got sacks of grain stacked in your loft. Enough to grind into flour, to trade, maybe even to feed your hens through the winter. You might even splurge and bake a proper loaf of bread, not just ash cakes on the hearthstone, but real bread with a crust that crackles and a center that steams when you break it open. That first bite? Worth every swing of the scythe. Every wisp of dust. Every aching finger. Because it's not just bread. It's proof. Proof that this land, stingy, rocky, brutal, can be convinced. That with time, patience, and a few bad songs while scattering seed, even grain will rise for you. Tonight, as you sip a cup of broth and look out the window, you think of that patch of rye again. It's small. It's uneven. Some spots look scraggly. But it's growing. And so are you. Tomorrow, you'll be back out there. Checking for pests. Whispering to the stalks. Maybe humming under your breath. Because in this life, even the quietest victories deserve a song. The sun barely peeks over the tree line when you hear it, something rustling in the corn. You freeze, hoe in hand, heart sinking. It's too early for the kids to be playing in the fields, and besides, the rustling has a different rhythm. Slow. Purposeful. You tiptoe closer, boots silent in the dew-drenched grass, and then you see it. A fat raccoon. Elbow deep in your bean patch. Again. It locks eyes with you. Doesn't even flinch. Just chews a little faster like it knows you won't catch it. You hurl a clod of dirt, curse softly, and it waddles off, tail high, ego intact, appetite unfulfilled only by inches. You've entered the pest war. Early American farming wasn't just about fighting the soil. It was a full-on skirmish with everything that crept, crawled, nibbled, or flapped. Your enemies are many: worms, beetles, weevils, moths, mice, birds, and larger opportunists like that smug raccoon. They come in waves, each one more clever and persistent than the last. Your scarecrow, bless his floppy old hat and lopsided grin, does his best. You moved him 3 times last week, hoping a little unpredictability might spook the crows. But the birds? They've caught on. You saw one sitting on his arm yesterday, casually pecking seeds from a nearby row like it had paid rent. Historians still argue whether scarecrows were truly effective or mostly symbolic, comforting relics from old-world traditions. You're leaning toward decorative disappointment, but it feels wrong to pull him down now. He's part of the landscape. A silent companion in this daily battle. You've tried other methods. Shiny metal scraps tied to string, fluttering in the breeze. Loud clappers made from wood. One neighbor swears by hanging dried fish heads from stakes around his field. Another uses a loaded musket with powder but no shot, fires it off every few hours just to scare the birds. You tried that once. Scared yourself more than anything else. And it's not just the birds. You kneel beside your squash vines and lift a leaf, there they are. Squash bugs, clinging to the stems like tiny armored invaders. You pinch them off one by one, muttering under your breath. You know it's a losing battle, but you fight it anyway. Because every leaf they destroy is food your children won't eat. One quirky colonial trick you heard at the last market day? A woman swore by sprinkling ground-up oyster shells around her plants to deter slugs. They hate the crunch, she said. You don't know if it's true, but you're already saving your next batch of shells. And then there are the caterpillars, green, smug, leaf-munching tubes of destruction. You've seen entire rows of cabbages stripped to skeletons overnight. Sometimes you lie awake, imagining them gnawing in the dark, wearing tiny hats, laughing in French. You consider inviting a few more chickens into the garden, they love caterpillars, but last time, they trampled the lettuce and dug up your carrots in a frenzy of enthusiasm. You're still finding feathers in the rhubarb. Rodents are a whole separate front in this war. Mice in the grain bins. Rats under the floorboards. You've got traps, sure, but they learn fast. You tried putting peppermint oil in the corners, like your neighbor suggested. The mice said thank you and kept eating. Your cat, in theory, should be helping. In practice, she naps on the windowsill and accepts admiration like a queen. She caught one mouse last month and spent the rest of the week preening like she'd saved the entire colony. You've learned to spot the signs, nibbled leaves, missing sprouts, oddly quiet mornings. Nature always leaves clues, usually in the form of droppings, footprints, or half-eaten tomatoes placed lovingly on your porch as some kind of sick tribute. And yet, you don't give up. Because in this life, you can't. You build barriers. You scatter ashes and herbs. You squint at the almanac, wondering if it might have included a footnote about cabbage worms this season. You stay up late with a lantern, checking under leaves like a paranoid inspector. You become a little more wild yourself, mirroring your enemies, learning their habits, setting your traps. One night, you and your neighbor sit by the fence, swapping pest stories. He tells you about a fox that keeps breaking into his henhouse. You tell him about the squirrel that's figured out how to open your shed door. He raises an eyebrow. I'm tellin' you, they're gettin' smarter. You both laugh. It's either that or cry. Historians may gloss over this part of farming, the constant tension between you and the rest of nature, but this is where the real war is fought. Not with armies, but with garden gloves and a stubborn will. And some days, you win. You pull a row of perfect beets. You spot a sunflower that somehow escaped the beetles. You watch a hawk swoop down and snatch a rat mid-scurry and whisper a quiet thank you to the sky. Those moments keep you going. Tonight, you light a lantern and walk one last round through the garden. The scarecrow waves gently in the breeze. The beans are climbing well. No fresh raccoon tracks. You smile. The pests will be back. They always are. But so will you. You're lugging a basket of seaweed up the hill and starting to question all your life choices. It's wet, it's slimy, and it smells like Poseidon's laundry. But this is your mulch. That's right. Tonight, we wade deep into one of the oddest and most brilliant tricks in your early American farming playbook, mulching. Not glamorous, not tidy, but absolutely essential when the soil is stingier than your uncle at tax time. You dump the seaweed at the base of your beans and spread it around with your boot. It slithers and plops into place like some half-awake octopus, but it does what you need it to do, traps moisture, chokes out weeds, and slowly, very slowly, breaks down into nutrients. You grimace at the smell. The plants don't mind. In fact, they seem to love it. Seaweed isn't your only option. You've tried sawdust, straw, pine needles, old hay, even shredded corn husks. Some folks get fancier, layering materials in alternating patterns, a practice you heard one farmer call lasagna gardening, which now makes you unreasonably hungry every time you mulch. Historians still argue whether colonial farmers truly understood the full benefits of mulching or simply copied what they saw in nature and hoped for the best. But you've seen it work. Soil that once baked dry now stays soft and cool. Rows that used to host a jungle of weeds now stay cleaner longer. Of course, not everyone's on board. Your neighbor, yes, the one with the experimental turkey feather fan, insists mulch suffocates the soil. He likes his rows neat and exposed, weeds and all. You tried it his way once. Your carrots were immediately swarmed by crabgrass and looked like orange toothpicks. You're back to mulching now. With a vengeance. One fringe method making the rounds involves using newspaper as mulch. That's right. Some clever soul started laying pages down between rows, weighing them with rocks, and letting them decompose right into the dirt. Keeps weeds down, they say. The ink? Non-toxic, mostly. You tried it once and felt very modern, until a goat chewed half of your spring planting instructions. But back to the old school methods. The beauty of mulch is in its simplicity. You're recycling what the farm already gives you, hay that's too moldy for the animals, leaves from the forest edge, bark and chips from firewood chores. Nothing gets wasted. And then there's the scent. Not the seaweed, no, that still smells like fermented fish tears. But straw mulch in the sun? It smells like peace. Like long summer afternoons and the golden haze of late July. You find yourself breathing deeper while you spread it. It feels right. You remember the first time you mulched your squash bed. The leaves perked up like someone read them a bedtime story. The soil underneath stayed soft and damp, even in the heat. You thought, why didn't I do this sooner? And then promptly ran out of mulch halfway through the row. Story of your life. One quirky tale from a traveling merchant: some frontier farmers used sheep's wool as mulch. The lanolin repelled insects, they claimed, and the wool trapped heat. You couldn't tell if he was serious or just trying to sell fleece, but now every time you shear a sheep, you eye the trimmings with suspicious curiosity. There's an art to mulching, too. Too thick and the roots suffocate. Too thin and weeds laugh at you. You experiment, thicker around tomatoes, thinner near root veggies. And yes, you've overdone it. Once, your onions nearly disappeared beneath a pile of wet hay and emerged later looking like they'd fought a moldy sea monster. But you learn. You learn that mulch is more than protection, it's transformation. It breaks down. It feeds the earth. It makes your hard soil just a little softer, season by season. And it saves you hours of weeding, which, let's be honest, is a miracle in itself. Historians might not give mulch its own chapter, but you know it deserves one. Because while flashy crops get the praise, and tools get the credit, it's the quiet layers of mulch, the rot, the cover, the mess, that keep the whole thing going. Tonight, after the last layers spread and the smell of wet leaves clings to your clothes, you rest your hands on your knees and look out over your patch. It's not neat. It's not pretty. But it's protected. Your plants sleep beneath blankets of straw and seaweed, safe from sun and storm. And you, with soil under your nails and a smile creeping across your tired face, know you've given them their best chance. You turn back toward the cabin, tracking little bits of mulch with each step, and think. Sometimes the best farming tool is just a little mess. The moon is hanging low over the trees when you finally step outside. It's nearly midnight, and you should be asleep, but something's been nagging at you. You walk out to the edge of the field, past the rows you mulched yesterday, and glance at the sky. Clear. Cool. Still. Tonight, you're not here to weed, water, or check for raccoons. Tonight, you're planting by the moon. It sounds strange, even to your own ears. You weren't raised to believe in this kind of thing, lunar calendars, signs, phases, but after enough seasons watching the weather ignore your best efforts, you start to wonder. And when the neighbor's potatoes, planted under a waxing moon, come up twice as strong as yours, well, you start to listen. You reach into your pocket and pull out a folded scrap of parchment, scrawled with notes from an old farmer down the road. Plant above-ground crops during the waxing moon, he told you, eyes narrowed like he was sharing a state secret. Root crops? One and moon only. And never, never on a dark moon. That's when the devil plays dice with your carrots. You thought he was joking. Now, not so much. Historians still argue whether early American farmers really followed lunar planting practices or whether it was more folklore than fact. But records from Europe and early colonies show signs of it everywhere. Tidy little planting charts inked with moon symbols and mysterious words like fruiting days and barren signs. You don't pretend to understand all of it. But you've seen patterns. You've noticed your beans sprout faster when planted during a waxing crescent. You've watched lettuce bolt early when sown under a full moon. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe not. Either way, you're planting now. Quietly. In the dark. You press the seeds into the damp earth with care, listening to the soft night sounds around you, the whisper of wind through the trees, the faint hoot of an owl. It's peaceful. It feels ancient. Like you're part of something much older than your own little plot of land. And there are other traditions too, whispered from garden to garden. Like planting potatoes on Good Friday, even if it falls during a frost. Or testing seed viability by dropping them in water, floaters get tossed, sinkers get planted. Or burying a penny beneath a tomato plant for luck and a good copper bite. You've tried them all at least once. Not because you're superstitious, though you are, a little, but because when the soil keeps secrets, any clue helps. One quirky practice you picked up from your grandmother? Placing broken bits of pottery around young seedlings. Keeps the slugs confused, she'd say, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You did it once out of respect. Now you do it every year. Your cabbage has never looked better. There's something comforting about these old rituals. They give rhythm to a life that often feels dictated by weather and whim. When everything's uncertain, frosts, floods, pests, you cling to what little control you can. And sometimes, that control looks like kneeling under a half moon and whispering your hopes to the seeds. You pause and look up. The stars are clearer than usual, pricked against the sky like tiny nails holding back the dark. You feel small. But not powerless. Some folks will laugh. They'll call it superstition, call it nonsense, tell you real farming is done by daylight and discipline. Let them. You've seen enough years now to know that sometimes, belief grows right alongside beans. And sometimes, belief is what gets them to grow. You walk back to the house with dirt on your hands and a calm in your chest. Maybe it's the moon. Maybe it's the work. Maybe it's just the joy of doing something without a deadline. Historians may never agree on how much faith early farmers placed in the stars, but they can't deny how often those stars showed up in journals, in carvings, in notes passed down through generations. And even if the science is shaky, the stories are strong. You remember once hearing a tale about a woman who swore her corn only grew when she sang a hymn while planting. Another claimed she could hear the seeds humming when the soil was just right. Were they exaggerating? Maybe. But their gardens were always full. Tonight, you hum a little tune of your own. Nothing fancy. Just a tune your mother used to sing while shelling peas. The rhythm matches your steps as you walk, the beat of your heart, the slow return to the cabin door. Inside, the fire crackles low, and your family sleeps peacefully. The seeds are in. The moon is rising. The world is quiet. And in this stillness, you feel a strange kind of confidence, like you've nudged the universe a little in your favor. Tomorrow, who knows? It might rain. Or hail. Or frost in July. But tonight? Tonight, you farmed by faith. You bend over the soil, sweat dripping from your brow, and carefully tuck another seed into place. It's a quiet moment, almost meditative, except that it's not your idea. This isn't a planting technique from your almanac, or a trick you picked up from a neighbor. This is something you borrowed, or maybe, if you're honest, something you outright took. Because today's method? It came from someone who was here long before you. Tonight, you're wrestling with something most early American farmers eventually faced: how to use, and misuse, native agricultural wisdom. From the very first settlements, colonists looked to the indigenous peoples not just for trade, but for survival. If you were lucky, like some of your ancestors, a local Wampanoag woman showed you how to plant beans with your corn. If you were desperate, you copied what you saw without understanding it. Either way, the knowledge was there, quiet, powerful, often ignored or misunderstood. You tried the Three Sisters method because you saw it work. You buried fish with corn because someone told you the locals did it, and you were too hungry to ask questions. And now? You're experimenting again, this time with a strange but promising idea: mounding. Instead of rows, you're planting in small hills, rounded mounds that warm faster in the spring, drain better in the rain, and concentrate nutrients. It's an old native practice, one you heard about through a friend who heard it from a friend who knew a trader who married a Penobscot woman. The lineage of information is shaky. The results? Surprisingly good. Still, you hesitate. Because borrowing is one thing. Understanding is another. Historians still argue how much early colonists truly understood indigenous farming practices. Some say colonists respected and adopted them wholesale. Others argue that they cherry-picked methods without grasping the deeper ecological systems behind them. You've got your opinion, formed mostly from years of trial and error, and it lands somewhere in the middle. Take companion planting, for example. You've learned to pair basil with tomatoes, onions with carrots, beans with just about everything. The native systems you're copying didn't happen by accident, they were part of a larger web, a rhythm of life tuned to the land, not fought against it. But you? You're still learning the steps to the dance. And sometimes you get it wrong. There was that year you tried planting your squash before your corn, thinking you'd get a head start. The result? A sprawling vine jungle that choked your seedlings before they had a chance. Or the time you planted corn in rows, like back in England, and wondered why it blew over at the first strong wind. Only later did you realize the clustered mounds weren't just for spacing, they were for support. One quirky belief you picked up from a Mi'kmaq elder passing through town. She said to always plant tobacco, even if you don't smoke it. It's a speaking plant, she said, helps you listen to the others. You tried it. The plants grew strong. You don't quite know what they said, but your garden's been healthier since. Sometimes you wonder what your native teachers must think of you, fumbling with their methods, mispronouncing their plant names, mixing up sacred herbs with kitchen spices. But you keep trying. Because deep down, you know this land wasn't made for you. And if you're going to stay, you need to listen to the people who know it best. And slowly, something shifts. You start to notice things you missed before. The way the birds return when the milkweed blooms. The hum of bees when the clover is thick. The way the air smells just before a good growing rain, not sharp like a storm, but rich, full, like something blooming under the surface. You stop fighting the wild edges of your field. You let the goldenrod grow at the margins. You stop tearing out every vine you can't name. You begin to see the garden not just as something to control, but something to negotiate with. One day, a neighbor visits and notices the changes. "You're not doing things the same as before," he says, poking at your squash mound. "This some Indian trick?" You pause. "It's something I'm learning." He grunts. "Still looks messy to me." You smile. Sometimes messy is better. That evening, as the sun sinks low and your shadow stretches long across the garden, you kneel in the soil and breathe deep. You don't know all the answers. You're still making mistakes. But for the first time, the land feels less like a stranger. Not quite a friend, but something closer. And maybe that's the real wisdom behind all the indigenous techniques you've borrowed, bent, or bungled, a different relationship. One where the land isn't a foe to be conquered, but a partner to be understood. Tomorrow, you'll plant another row of beans, not in straight lines, but in spirals, like you saw sketched in a book of Abenaki stories. You don't know if it will work. But you're willing to listen. You sit on the edge of your wagon wheel, fiddling with a scrap of iron and a splintery piece of wood. It doesn't look like much, yet, but in your mind, it's genius. You're trying to build a new tool, one that might save your back a few hours of hoeing every week. It's a gamble, sure, and your fingers are already blistered from your last attempt, but you can't help it. The idea's stuck in your head. Welcome to the intersection of exhaustion and inspiration, what some folks would call Yankee ingenuity, and what you sometimes call sheer desperation. Because the truth is, when the soil's tough, the sun's relentless, and every growing season feels like a game of roulette, you start to get creative. You have to. There's no farm supply store down the road. No catalog of miracle tools. It's just you, your brain, and whatever scraps haven't rusted or rotted. This is where your real farming happens, not just in the fields, but in the moments between. In the shed, at the dinner table, lying awake at night sketching out plans in your head. You're always tweaking, always adjusting. You've turned an old rake into a seed spacer. Hammered a broken scythe into a planting stick. Reinforced your hoe with a metal plate from a cracked horseshoe. Your neighbors roll their eyes. Until it works. Then they want to borrow it. Historians like to celebrate Yankee ingenuity as a sort of cultural trait, a mix of thrift, cleverness, and elbow grease that made the early American farmer famous. But they still argue whether it was really genius, or just necessity wearing a clever hat. You tend to think it's both. You don't invent because you're brilliant. You invent because your back hurts and you're out of options. Take your new idea, a sort of multi-tool planter, a mashup of dibble stick, furrow scraper, and seed dropper. In theory, it'll let you plant corn standing up. In practice? So far, it drops 3 seeds at once and occasionally jams. You're calling it a prototype. Your children are calling it the seed vomiter. Still, you keep tinkering. Your wife rolls her eyes when you bring yet another, adjusted rake, into the house. "Why are there gears in the sink?" she asks. "Because I had an idea while washing turnips," you reply. She doesn't argue, just hands you a towel and steps over your pile of bolts. You're not alone in this. Down the road, a fellow is trying to rig a windmill from old cart wheels and a church bell. Another neighbor's experimenting with wooden piping for underground irrigation. You all swap notes, tips, and horror stories. You laugh when things go wrong and steal shamelessly when things go right. One quirky contraption you actually admire? A fellow nearby crafted a squirrel-powered grain grinder. He baited a wheel with peanuts and let the critters spin it. It worked. Once. Then the squirrels unionized. But innovation isn't always about tools. You've experimented with crop spacing, planting schedules, even soil amendments. You tried burying fish heads mixed with wood ash. You planted clover as a living mulch. You stacked old logs around your squash to trap warmth and moisture. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it smells weird and attracts possums. It's not just creativity, it's adaptability. It's what keeps you from falling into despair when a late frost zaps your beans or your cow tips over the rain barrel again. You pivot. You try something new. You whisper to yourself, maybe this will work. And sometimes, it does. Historians point out that many early innovations weren't glamorous. They were local, humble, born from lived experience, not theory. Few got written down. Fewer still made it into the big books of agriculture. But you know better. You see them every day, in patched fence gates, in smoothed handles, in clever ways to trap voles without crushing your own fingers. And while you may not be famous, your ingenuity leaves a mark. Remember that double-walled stone trench you built around your garden? The one that holds rainwater and keeps rabbits out? A few townsfolk laughed. Now 3 of them have copies. You see the same curve in their walls, the same gaps filled with moss and broken glass. You don't say anything. You just nod when they brag. One evening, your daughter sits beside you on the porch. She's holding a carved wooden spoon she made herself, the handle twisted like a vine. You ask why. She shrugs. I wanted it to look like the beans grow. You don't say anything, but you feel it, that same spark. The need to make something better. Or at least, different. Because in this world, nothing stays still. Not the land. Not the weather. Not even your hoe, which just broke again for the 3rd time this month. So you go inside, light your lamp, and lay the pieces on the table. Maybe a shorter handle this time. Maybe reinforce it with wire. Maybe add a hinge. You're not sure. But you'll try. Because the land doesn't reward brilliance. It rewards persistence. You stand in your field at dawn, wrapped in wool against the creeping chill, and trace your eyes along the furrows, the walls, the garden beds. Everything you see, every row, every stone, every stubborn patch of squash, is your doing. Not yours alone, maybe, but your hands were in it, your sweat soaked into it, your stubbornness built the bones of it. This rocky patch of land, the one that tried so hard to shake you off like a burr, has finally begun to soften. Not just to the seed, but to you. It didn't happen quickly. You remember how it started, one crooked clearing hacked from the forest, filled with stones, shadows, and second guesses. You remember burning stumps, stacking rocks, burying fish, and hoping against hope that anything at all would grow. The soil didn't make it easy. It never did. But you stayed. You learned to coax instead of command. You learned to listen, to the wind, the bugs, the moon, the advice shouted over a fence or whispered at market. You borrowed wisdom from neighbors and native hands, from your spouse and your children, from the weeds that came uninvited but left behind lessons. And now, your field is no longer just scraped earth and bad luck. It's a story. A living, sprawling, sunburnt story. The stone walls that once felt like punishment now stand as proud borders, testaments to every rock you cursed and carried. They snake along your land like quiet witnesses, holding your field's shape even when you couldn't. The rows, though crooked, hold life. Beans coil and cling like they're reaching for tomorrow. Corn tosses in the breeze, tall and gold, as if it's always belonged here. Your squash, the stubborn underdog, bulges at the edges of the plot, daring the weeds to try again. Even the fallow field has begun to green with promise. Historians, bless them, like to draw neat lines. They say things like, colonial farming advanced due to perseverance and adaptation, as though survival here were ever that tidy. You know better. You know that farming this land is part science, part superstition, part gut instinct, and part sheer will. They also argue whether early American success was built on ingenuity or brute labor. But you've come to learn, it's not either/or. It's both. It's inventing a tool from broken iron and spending a week nursing a twisted wrist from digging too deep. It's planting by the moon and hauling buckets in a thunderstorm because the beans are thirsty and your gut said wait. It's seeing the land not just as a battlefield, but as a partner. A cranky, slow-moving, occasionally generous partner. You've made peace with its quirks. The rocks don't surprise you anymore. The pests still come, but you know their patterns. The weather is still fickle, but you've stopped shouting at the clouds. And your family, oh, your family. They've grown along with it. Your children know the names of plants better than street signs. Your spouse can walk through the squash patch with their eyes closed and tell you which vine needs turning. Even the cat finally started catching mice again, though she still sleeps more than she works. You've built more than just food. You've built continuity. A rhythm. A place that holds your story in every footprint. And now, at the edge of your field, you pause. The wind stirs the corn, and for a moment, you swear you can hear all of it whispering. Not in words, exactly. But in echoes of everything you've done to get here. The first fish you buried. The first wall you built. The first garden row you failed, then replanted. It's all here. And it always will be. The sun climbs higher now, warming the soil, softening the shadows, and wrapping your land in the quiet gold of morning. The wind gentles. The leaves hush. Even the birds seem to settle into a slower rhythm. You lean on your hoe, yes, that same battered one with the patched handle and the rusted blade, and let your breath slow. There's no more rush. No more worrying about whether the seeds will sprout or the rain will come. Not tonight. Tonight, your work is done. The field stretches out behind you, no longer defiant but familiar. The rocks are still there, of course, peeking from the edges, winking like old friends. The plants sleep in their mulch beds, rooted deep in soil you made better with patience and filth. The scarecrow stands guard, not effective, maybe, but enduring. You turn toward the path that leads home, the garden gate gently swinging, the windows glowing soft from the hearth inside. You'll go in soon. Rest your hands. Wash the dirt from your skin. But for now, you just stand, listening to the last sighs of the day. You made this. With grit and guesswork and borrowed wisdom. You coaxed crops from a landscape that tried to starve you. And now? Now it grows for you. So close your eyes. Let your mind drift, not to tomorrow's chores, but to the rhythm of this place, the rustle of leaves, the hush of straw underfoot, the sound of a stone settling into place. You're not just a farmer now. You're part of the land. And it, finally, is part of you. Sweet dreams.